All right, let's dive into another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling the Nephilim.
Ooh, okay.
And we've got this article called The Nephilim, Insights into the Fallen Ones. And just looking it over, it looks like it's going to be pretty wild.
Yeah, the Nephilim are one of those topics that just never seem to get old.
Right. Like they
Yeah,
just keep popping up in all these different contexts.
exactly. You've got ancient myths, biblical accounts, all these historical speculations, even some modern-day conspiracy theories.
It's like they're this thread that runs through like
Yeah.
all of human history.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, like, what is it about these beings that keep capturing our imagination?
Okay, well, so let's start with the basics here.
Mm.
Who were the Nephilim? Like, what do we actually know about them?
Well, the term Nephilim itself comes from Hebrew,
Right.
and it's often translated as giants or fallen ones.
Okay, giants or fallen ones. So right off the bat, we've got this sense of something that's both powerful and kind of like ominous, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of mystery and maybe even a little bit of danger surrounding them.
Okay, so where do they show up in like biblical accounts and stuff?
Well, this article jumps right into the deep end, pointing out that they're said to have existed both before and after the Great Flood.
Wait, hold on. Before and after, how's that possible? I thought the flood was supposed to like wipe everything out.
Right, that's what makes it so intriguing. The author points to Genesis 6.4 as evidence.
Oh, okay, Genesis. I vaguely remember that from Sunday school.
Well, that passage specifically mentions giants existing both in the time leading up to the flood and then afterward, which, raises some pretty big questions.
Yeah, like how did they survive? And like what does that say about their origins?
Exactly. And that's where those different interpretations come in.
Right, because I've heard people say like, oh, the Nephilim were just a race of large, powerful humans, but then there's the whole fallen angel connection too.
And this article really leans into that fallen angel interpretation, connecting it to the whole story of Lucifer's rebellion and the fall of the angels from heaven, like in Revelation 12.7 to 10.
Oh yeah, okay. So basically, these fallen angels become the Nephilim, and they come to Earth before the flood and cause all kinds of chaos.
That's the basic idea. The author argues that their arrival led to widespread corruption, and that ultimately triggered God's judgment.
Okay, so I get how the Nephilim could show up before the flood, but how could they possibly have survived it? Like, wouldn't they have been wiped out along with everyone else?
That's where things get really interesting. See, the author points out a key difference between angels and humans.
Okay, what's that?
Well, angels, unlike us, they don't need the basic necessities of life. They don't eat, they don't drink, and they don't even sleep.
Oh, wow, I guess that would make them pretty tough to get rid of.
Exactly. So this suggests they could be incredibly long-lived, maybe even immortal, which would explain their presence on both sides of a global flood.
Okay, so maybe the fallen angels themselves could have survived the flood, but what about, like, their kids? Weren't they supposed to have had offspring with human women?
Right, the giants that were said to be born from those unions.
Yeah, those guys. What happened to them?
Well, the author proposes that those hybrid beings did, in fact, perish in the flood.
Okay, so they didn't inherit their parents' immortality.
Apparently not. But here's the thing. The author doesn't rule out the possibility that the fallen angels kept, producing more offspring after the flood.
Wait, really? So even after God wipes out humanity with the flood, these fallen angels are still messing around and creating more giant offspring.
That's the implication, yeah. And that raises the question, like, how much influence did they continue to have on the post-flood world? And how are those hybrid offspring, like, factoring into all of this?
Yeah, and this is where the article starts to get even more interesting.
It really does. The author even mentions the Book of Enoch and some, like, modern research that suggests giants might have existed in different parts of the world well after the flood.
Oh, wow, the Book of Enoch. That's a bit of a controversial text, isn't it? Like, isn't it outside of the traditional Bible?
It is. It offers all these fascinating descriptions of these watcher angels and their roles, but most Christian denominations don't consider it part of the canonical Bible.
Okay, so it's more like an extra layer of, like, mythology and interpretation surrounding the biblical account.
Exactly. It's definitely something to be aware of when you're, considering these kinds of texts.
Right, like we got to be careful about what sources we're using and how we're interpreting them.
Absolutely. We need to approach it all with a healthy dose of discernment.
Okay, so let's say we have these potentially immortal fallen angels roaming the earth, maybe even still creating more giant offspring. What happens next?
Well, that's where we get into the whole Tower of Babel incident, that story about humanity trying to reach heaven by building this massive
Oh,
tower.
yeah, I remember that one. God gets pretty upset.
Or he does. And what's interesting here is how the author connects this event to the Nephilim.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do they tie those two things together?
Well, the author suggests that the 70 nations that emerge after the Tower of Babel, when humanity is scattered, correspond to 70 rebellious angels who essentially become like princes and principalities over those nations.
Hold on. So each nation has its own fallen angel ruler, like pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
That's the idea, yeah. It's pretty wild when you think about it.
It is. It makes you wonder if, like, the influence of these fallen angels might explain some of the common threads we see in, like, mythology and folklore across different cultures.
Yeah, exactly. Like, could they be the unseen architects of, like, ancient civilizations and stuff?
Okay, this is blowing my mind. And speaking of ancient civilizations, I remember the article also mentioned something about stewardship, like how the Nephilim are tied to the idea of, like, humanity's responsibility for caring for the earth.
Right. The author argues that God created Earth to reflect his glory, all the living creatures, all of creation, and then humanity to, like, be the stewards of it all.
Yeah, okay, I see where this is going.
So, the Nephilim, through their actions and influence, they disrupted that harmony. They brought in violence, corruption, even what the author calls, like, genetic tampering. They basically violated that sacred stewardship.
So, like, the flood was God's way of hitting the reset button, right?
Yep.
Like wiping the slate clean and restoring balance after all that went down.
That's one way to look at it for sure. And it really makes you think about, how we treat the earth today. Like, are we honoring that call to stewardship, or are we making some of the same mistakes that, led to the flood in the first place?
That's a really good point. It's like, are we inviting the attention of forces we can't control?
Ooh, that's a chilling thought.
It is. And speaking of forces we can't control, that kind of leads into another aspect of the Nephilim that this article explores, their connection to demons.
Okay, yeah. This is where things get really interesting.
So tell me more about that. Like, what does the author say about the Nephilim and demons?
Well, the author suggests that the disembodied spirits of those giant offspring, the ones who died in the flood, they became what we know as demons.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that the demons we hear about in the Bible and even today are the spirits of, like, the Nephilim's kids?
That's what the author is proposing, yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty wild idea. So, like, there are these restless spirits that are constantly trying to, I don't know, possess people or something.
The author even cites a passage from the Bible, Matthew 8:29, I think it is, where these demons are begging Jesus not to send them into a bodiless existence.
Oh, wow. So they really don't want to be without a body.
It seems like they're desperate for some kind of physical form, and that actually ties into the author's earlier point about the fallen angels potentially creating more hybrid offspring even after the flood.
Oh, I see. So if those offspring keep dying, it creates more of these disembodied spirits, which could explain why demonic activity seems to keep happening throughout history and even, into the present day.
Exactly. And it creates this like cycle of, these fallen angels creating these offspring. The offspring die and become demons, and the demons keep causing trouble and, trying to influence people.
It's like this never-ending battle between good and evil, playing out on this supernatural level.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, like, are we all just pawns in this cosmic chess game between angels and demons?
That's a pretty heavy thought.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there are places or, like, historical events that might be more prone to demonic activity based on their connection to the Nephilim.
That's a pretty chilling thought. It makes you wonder if there are places where the veil between, like, the physical and spiritual realms is thinner, places where it's easier for those forces to interact.
Okay, this is getting pretty intense. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, which is the Nephilim's potential impact on ancient civilizations.
Right. The idea that their legacy might be visible in some pretty, shall we say, monstrous forms.
Yeah. I'm talking about those, like, legendary creatures, dragons, giants, those sirens that lure sailors to their doom. Could those be rooted in real encounters with the Nephilim or their offspring?
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? Imagine a world where these extraordinary beings, these Nephilim and their hybrid children, were just, like, walking around among us.
I can see how that would definitely inspire some pretty wild tales.
Yeah, stories that would be passed down through generations, changing and evolving with each retelling, but always holding on to a kernel of truth, a memory of a time when, the world was a very different place.
I've always loved mythology, but now you're making me see it in a whole new light. Like, what if those myths and legends aren't entirely fictional? What if they're based on real encounters with beings that were, just way outside of our normal experience?
And that actually makes you wonder about history itself, like what events, what discoveries, what stories have been lost or distorted over time because they just didn't fit into the way we understand the world.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's like we're being challenged to re-examine everything we thought we knew, you know? Like to look beyond the surface and consider the possibility that there's more to the story than we've been told.
Exactly. And that's what I find so exciting about this whole topic. It takes us beyond just the simple facts and figures and invites us to delve into these mysteries, these unanswered questions, and these tantalizing possibilities that, they're just out there waiting to be explored.
I completely agree. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful so far. We've covered so much ground, from the Nephilim's origins to their potential impact on humanity, their possible connection to ancient technology and myths, and even their role in this ongoing battle between good and evil.
We've really gone deep, haven't we?
We have. We've looked at biblical interpretations, historical speculations, even ventured into the realm of the supernatural.
It's amazing how one article can spark so many different ideas and questions.
And we're not even done yet. There are still some things you need to unpack, some threads to pull on, some mysteries to unravel.
Exactly. So stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into the world of the Nephilim.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
This article really frames this whole Nephilim thing within like this bigger context of spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
It suggests that the Nephilim and their whole demonic offspring, they represent this force of darkness that's constantly battling against the forces of light.
Okay, I can see that. But is the author saying that the Nephilim are like directly responsible for all the bad stuff that happens in the world, like wars, genocides, all the corruption? Is that all on them?
Not necessarily directly responsible, no, but the idea is that their presence, their influence, it creates this environment where evil can, kind of take root and thrive.
So like they're not pulling the strings, but they're setting the stage.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
But it still makes you wonder, like, how much free will do we actually have if there are these powerful forces at play, influencing things behind the scenes?
That's a question that's been debated for centuries. Like, do we actually have a choice in all of this? Or are we just pawns in this cosmic game between good and evil?
Yeah, like, is it all predetermined?
The author doesn't really give a definitive answer, but they do offer a glimmer of hope. They remind us that, ultimately God is in control, and even in the face of darkness, his light will always shine through.
Okay, that's a bit reassuring. I'm starting to feel kind of overwhelmed by all this talk of fallen angels and demons and stuff. It's good to know there's a bigger picture, the divine plan that offers a path towards redemption.
Right. Like, there's still hope.
Yeah, definitely. But the author also acknowledges that it's not going to be easy. Like there will be challenges and temptations, times when it feels like, the darkness is winning.
It's a constant struggle.
It is. But we do have the power to choose, right? Like we can choose to resist that negative influence and fight for good.
Absolutely. We can arm ourselves with knowledge, with faith, with the courage to stand up for what's right.
And that's a really important point. Like this whole deep dive, it's not just about understanding the Nephilim and their role in history. It's about understanding our role in this cosmic battle and choosing to be on the side of light.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're not just like spectators in all of this. We're active participants who can actually influence the outcome.
Okay, I love that. So let's talk a bit more about that idea of active participation.
Yeah.
The article also talks about ancient technology, right? And how it might be connected to the Nephilim.
It's a really intriguing idea. Like, the author points to those incredible structures we've been talking about, the pyramids, Stonehenge, as possible evidence of their advanced knowledge.
I mean, those things are still mind-boggling today.
Right. Think about it. How could ancient civilizations, with the tools and resources they supposedly had, create these feats of engineering? It's baffling.
Now, I've always found the whole ancient aliens theory a bit too out there, but like the idea of ancient angelic intervention, that's a whole new perspective.
It really is, and it raises so many questions. Like, if these fallen angels were capable of sharing this kind of advanced knowledge, what was their motivation? Were they trying to, help humanity progress? Or was it something more, like, manipulative? Even sinister.
And if they were that advanced, what other secrets that they have hidden away, like lost technologies, hidden artifacts, forbidden knowledge that could, like, totally change the world as we know it?
It's a tantalizing thought, right? It makes us want to explore further, to dig deeper into the mysteries of the past.
I know. It's like, what if there's a whole other layer of history that we're just, like, completely missing? A hidden history that could, like, rewrite everything we thought we knew.
Exactly. And maybe some of those secrets are out there, just waiting to be uncovered.
Okay, now you're really making me want to go on an archaeological dig. But seriously, this whole idea that the Nephilim might have played a role in shaping ancient technology, that's a game changer.
It really is. It challenges us to think outside the box and consider possibilities that we might have dismissed before.
It's like we're constantly expanding our understanding of history, right? As we discover new things and reevaluate old evidence.
Absolutely. And this article really highlights the fact that there's still so much we don't know, so much that's still shrouded in mystery.
And that's what makes this whole topic so captivating, right?
Yeah.
It pushes us to think beyond the boundaries of our current understanding, to explore the unknown, and to, like, grapple with these mysteries that have fascinated humans for centuries.
This article also brings up another really interesting point, which is the idea that the Nephilim's legacy might be visible in, the myths and legends that have been passed down through generations.
Oh, yeah, like those stories about dragons and giants and all those fantastical creatures.
Exactly. The author seems to suggest that those stories might not be entirely fictional, like they could be based on real encounters with beings that were, far from ordinary.
So basically, what we think of as myth and legend might actually have some roots in reality.
That's the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where these extraordinary beings, the Nephilim and their hybrid offspring, were just like walking around among us.
I can see how that would definitely make for some pretty wild stories.
Exactly. Stories that would be passed down through generations, changing and evolving with each retelling, but always holding on to a little piece of the truth, a memory of a time when the world was a very different place.
I've always loved mythology, but now you're making me see it in a whole new light.
And that makes you wonder, right? Like, how much of what we dismiss as myth or legend actually has some basis in reality? How much have we forgotten or misinterpreted over time?
That's a really thought-provoking question. It's like we're being challenged to re-examine our whole understanding of history and, like, the nature of reality itself.
Exactly. And that's what I find so exciting about deep dives like this. They push us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to be open to new possibilities.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful so far. We've explored so much about the Nephilim, their origins, their impact on humanity, their possible connection to ancient technology and myths, and the role in this whole battle between good and evil.
We've really covered a lot of ground.
We have,
Yeah.
and we're not done yet. There's still a few more things we want to touch on before we wrap up.
Yeah, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the Nephilim. Man, my head is still spinning from all the stuff we've talked about.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. I mean, this one article has really opened up a whole can of worms, hasn't it?
It really has. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's try to, like, bring it all together. What are some of the key takeaways our listeners should remember about the Nephilim?
Okay, well, I think one of the most important things to remember is that the Nephilim are deeply rooted in, biblical accounts and interpretations.
Ugh.
Whether we see them as fallen angels or their hybrid offspring, they're not just figures of myth and legend.
Right, they're part of a, like, religious and historical context that shapes how people understand their significance.
Exactly. And that context is really important for understanding the different interpretations and beliefs that people have about them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What else stands out to you as a key takeaway?
Well, I think the article's emphasis on the Nephilim's potential connection to ancient knowledge and technology is really fascinating. It challenges us to, like, reconsider how we view the advancements of ancient civilizations, especially those that seem to, defy our understanding of the tools and knowledge that were available at the time.
It's like the author is suggesting that maybe we've underestimated our ancestors,
Right.
or that there were other influences at play that we haven't really considered.
Right. And, finally, I think it's crucial to remember the article's overall message about the struggle between good and evil.
Yeah, that was a big theme throughout the article.
It was. And whether we accept the literal existence of the Nephilim and their demonic offspring or view them as, powerful metaphors, the concept itself reminds us that there are forces in the world, both seen and unseen, that can corrupt and lead humanity astray.
It's a call to action, isn't it? Like, A reminder that we're not just passive observers in all of this, but active participants who have to choose which side we're on.
Exactly. And that choice ultimately shapes not only our individual destinies, but the course of, human history itself.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. It makes you realize that our choices really do matter on a, cosmic scale.
They really do. And, speaking of choices, I think it's worth leaving our listeners with some questions to ponder as they continue to explore this topic on their own.
Oh, I like that. Like, what kind of questions?
Well, for instance, if the Nephilim were responsible for such advanced technology in ancient times, what secrets might still be hidden in the ruins of lost civilizations? What might archaeologists and historians uncover that could shed more light on their influence?
Ooh, that's a good one. Makes me think about all those ancient myths and legends about lost cities and hidden treasures. What if some of those stories are more than just fantasy? What if they hold a clue to something real, something extraordinary that's just waiting to be rediscovered?
And then there's the whole question of, demonic activity. If we entertain the idea that demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim's offspring, could certain locations or historical events be more prone to demonic activity based on their connection to the Nephilim?
Oh, wow. That's a pretty creepy thought. Are there places where the veil between the physical and spiritual realms is thinner? Places where it's easier for those forces to, interact?
It's definitely a thought-provoking idea, and ultimately I think that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating, It pushes us to think outside the box, to explore the unknown, and to wrestle with these mysteries that have captivated humanity for centuries.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of the Nephilim. We hope this deep dive has, sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep exploring. Until next time, keep those minds open and those imaginations engaged.